Good. So good evening. Welcome back. It's a very quiet and soft evening on Bere Island, and welcome to everyone who's joining us from wherever you may be. I think I should begin by saying, first of all, we're not supposed to have a discussion period at this session, as we did last night, so we will keep to our schedule. But I would like to catch up with that idea of the two hemispheres of the brain that I mentioned this morning, which I keep on forgetting to deliver on. And if you remember, I was comparing it with the two sides of the island. The inhabited side here, the landward side, and then the wilderness on the other side. And our consciousness as a whole tends to be dualistic. We tend to divide the world into people who do this and people who do that. When we start to generalize, we normally do it in this dualistic way. And of course, science has known for a long time that the brain is divided, that we have two hemispheres of the brain. But it's only very recently, in the last 10, 15 years, that due to amazing developments in our technology of being able to examine the brain and see how it works and mirror it and image it, that we've been able to see exactly what these two hemispheres of the brain are doing and what they tell us about ourselves and about the way we perceive reality. And the person who has brought all of this research up to date is a British psychiatrist called Ian McGilchrist, who is actually speaking at our Meditatio Centre later this year. And this has been a passion of his, I think, for the last 20 years, and he's finally published his masterpiece on it called The Master and His Emissary. And his point is really quite simple, although it takes 500 pages to expound, but in the same way that meditation is very simple, but you can talk endlessly about it. It's a big idea in the same way that meditation is a big idea. It takes us, I think, to a core level of perception and awareness. So he explains that these two hemispheres of the brain are something of a mystery and challenge for our understanding. Why, over billions of years of evolution, have we remained with a divided brain? That's not only us, but birds and mammals. And did something go wrong? Wouldn't it be more economical to merge them? And his conclusion is in fact that the two hemispheres of the brain are both involved in all of the operations of thought and feeling and perception. So it's not a simplistic division of labor, that the left brain is mathematical and the right brain is poetical. So it's more than that. However, he says that there is a world of difference between these two hemispheres of the brain, that they are actually divided because we need two kinds of attention. He uses the example of a bird, and actually it became very vivid because I was taking a photograph of a bird the other day, and it was sitting on a wall, and I was waiting. It was a very colorful, beautiful bird, and I was trying to get a good shot of it, and every time I was about to do it, it would swoop down on the ground. And then it would come back a few seconds later with a worm or something in its mouth, and it would sit there with its head cocking from one side to another like that. And I remembered what McGilchrist says, is that a bird like that is actually paying very focused attention on the ground. So it's looking to see where the crumbs of bread are, or the sign of a worm or something tasty. But the bird is also looking around for photographers or cats. So we can't pay attention to two things at the same time. We have to pay attention to one thing at a time. And so his argument is that these two hemispheres of the brain allow us to pay this focused attention and this ambient, inclusive, panoramic attention as well. So the question is not so much what do they do, but how do they do it? How do these two kinds of attention unfold in our consciousness? Attention is the key to this mystery of human consciousness. Attention is the key to the story that we're reading in Holy Week. Attention is the essence of prayer. Attention is the heart of all human relationship, of all relationships, including our relationship with ourselves, with others, with our environment, with the universe, with God. So attention is the great mystery. One of the things I think we see in the story of Holy Week, as we watch Jesus pass through the different scenes of the story, is that quality of attention that he is shown to be exhibiting. And it's an attention that brings him to the cross and to his final act of compassion on the cross, where he forgives those who are doing what they do not know, what they are doing unconsciously. Father, forgive them because they don't know what they are doing. I mean, that act of forgiveness shows the highest level of attention, which is when it becomes pure compassion, where it's not calculated, it's not conceptualized, it is an attention or an approach to others that flows spontaneously, directly from our heart. So we can't try to be compassionate. You can't teach compassion. We can learn compassion by learning to live, by learning to pay attention, but this is something that flows spontaneously and naturally from us. So attention is key to it, and that's why this science of the two hemispheres of the brain is interesting for us, I think. So basically the left hemisphere of the brain is to do with fixity. It sees and perceives and shapes the world as something that is fixed. It narrows it down to a certainty. We all like to be certain about things, to come to decisions, to bring closure, to come to a definition. Okay, so what are we really talking about? What's the bottom line? And what are we going to do? So that's the left hemisphere of the brain, which is functional, necessary, but also based upon an illusion. The illusion is, of course, the idea of certainty itself. There is no certainty. Certainty is an illusion. There could be very strong probabilities, but no certainty. So the right hemisphere of the brain is much more associated with the flow of life, not the fixity of things, but the flow. And in this kind of attention, we are open to possibility. We're not looking for certainty, definition, and closure. We are in touch with the flow, and therefore to the infinite range of possibility. We're humble enough in the right hemisphere kind of attention to know that we cannot understand everything, we cannot know all the properties of any particular system at the same time. So we live with unknowing, that contemplative quality the cloud of unknowing calls unknowing. The left hemisphere of the brain, rather like Pontius Pilate, as we looked at him today, is in charge of manipulating the world, understanding it, good politician, seeing how things work, tweaking it here, influencing it there, controlling it, manipulating it. And it does that on the basis of its preconceived idea of the world, its preconception. And the left brain, left hemisphere, is particularly good, although dangerously good, at creating a representation of reality, a map, a system, a diagram, a model of the world. And we construct this representation of reality with abstractions we make generalities, generalizations. We feed that into a picture of the world, and then we find ourselves paying attention to this representation of reality rather than to the world itself. This is where we have to be very careful that we keep the balance. So whereas the left hemisphere of the brain represents or represents reality to us through a model, through an image, through a picture that we think we can control and predict, the right hemisphere of the brain specializes in new experience. So because our right hemisphere attention is in touch with the flow of things, it can see things as they actually are now, not as they are represented. But it sends this information, this new experience, to the left hemisphere of the brain where it is packaged and stored and filed. So we've already done that. If you're first time on Bere Island, you now know where the Heritage Centre is and where your bed is. And that's your left hemisphere. If you're still getting lost, then you'll need to sleep on your left-hand side tonight. So it's not that this is a bad part of our consciousness or a bad kind of attention. But we need to know what kind of attention it is and what kind of reality it presents to us. Because attention very much shapes the world we live in. The kind of attention we give to the world will determine the kind of world we are living in, the world we're making. And if you look at the world as it is today, with what's happened in Belgium today, what's happening with our environment, what's happening with most of our institutions, we might well conclude that the kind of attention that we are giving to the world is not creating a very real world. And that the answer to this dilemma is not a left-brained kind of answer, let's find a solution to this problem, but it is the response to it is a new way of attention, a new consciousness, a new way of seeing and perceiving. And this is, I think, the challenge that we face in our own lives continually, but it's the challenge we face globally now in the global consciousness that we are part of. So anyway, I find this is quite helpful, this distinction between the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. It's not simplistic. It's based on very solid evidence, which you can find in those 500 pages. And I think it's just basically helpful to see that we can look at the world with the left hemisphere of the brain as a map, in touch with its representation of reality. But we also need, primarily, to be in touch with the world as it is. And so the conclusion, or the judgment really, that McGilchrist makes is that we have mixed up the roles of the master and the servant, or the emissary. That which of these two kinds of attention is actually in touch with real experience as it is now. And that is the right hemisphere, the contemplative, if you like. And this doesn't mean abstract, this actually means very embodied, very real, very actual. And I think this is something we are surprised to discover, perhaps, through the practice of meditation. That meditation makes us more embodied, more grounded, more real, more in touch with the world around us and the emotions of the people we're living with, more in touch with the real world. And to think of meditation as some kind of spiritualization or abstraction or escape from the nitty-grittiness or the messiness of the world is a fundamental error. But it's an error that has been generated because of the excessive reliance we have come to place on the left hemisphere kind of attention. This is what we worship. Look at the way our institutions are run. We worship the systems that we create, systems that often dehumanize us, that are often counterproductive, that often run counter to the very objectives of the institution itself. So the master, in this sense, is the right hemisphere kind of attention. And the emissary, the messenger, is the left brain. So just get the balance right. And the balance is in favor of reality. In the reading from St. John that we ended this morning's session with, St. John speaks about the reality of Christ, the realness of Christ, the solid reality, he says. So the emphasis is in favor of the priority of this contemplative kind of attention. And that is, I think, the meaning of the story of Martha and Mary that we've heard and examined many times. When Jesus says to Martha, the epitome of the left brain consciousness, when it is out of control, when it is overwhelmed, it's not a bad kind of consciousness. It's good that Martha should be doing these many tasks for people, but the problem is she got distracted. Because she got distracted, alienated from herself, the quality of her work, the quality of her mind, her relationship with everybody around her was was spoiled. She became a menace, actually, to herself and to her environment. This isn't to condemn her, it's to point out that this is our tendency. This seems to be the bias of human behavior, human consciousness, that we naturally, maybe this is the result of the fall, we naturally veer towards over-reliance on this left brain mentality, on attention. So when Jesus says to Martha, Mary has chosen the better part, I think this is the meaning of his comment. His comment is not an unfair judgment on Martha, but it is an exposition of the priority of being over doing. And being is in touch, puts us in touch. The experience of being is grounding in the present moment, in the reality of things as they are. So our meditation clearly rebalances our capacity to pay attention in the right way and to in different situations to certainly use both kinds of attention. I think all the research shows, the very objective scientific, psychological research shows that meditators function better. They are less stressed, they're less unbalanced, and they are more in touch with the people and the needs and the actual circumstances that they are working in. So it isn't that meditation is some kind of going off to a cloister where you don't have to face the realities of life. It's about entering that inner room, the cloister within us, where the balance is already established. The balance is already there in us. Now, when the left brain kind of organizational mind looks at this problem, it probably says, how are we going to solve it? What kind of programs do I need to bring in? What kind of experts do I need to bring in to solve it? And how much is this going to cost? And how long is it going to take? Simplicity is the virtue of the right or contemplative consciousness. The left hemisphere tends to complicate, just as our bureaucracy gets more and more complicated. Our systems become more and more dehumanized continually, as long as they feed off themselves. But the contemplative consciousness cuts through that like a hot knife through butter and brings about a more simple perception of the world. Simplicity means what? Thomas Aquinas says, simplicity, a God is infinitely simple. God is infinitely simple. And if simplicity is a key attribute of God, we should take it seriously. We should reflect deeply on what it means. And I think we can see this simplicity in the story of Holy Week. It's not a simple story when you think of all the politics, all the emotions, all the betrayal, all the failure, all the rioting, all of the mixed motives. It's not simple. It's as complicated as life is. But the simplicity is focused in the person, the central figure, the person of Jesus, and in his perception, his awareness of the moment he is in. So simplicity is about clarity. Clarity, consistency. Simplicity is about being one, being centered. And this is the real work of prayer. This is why perhaps what we need more desperately than anything else in our world and in our education and in our medicine and in our business and politics and international affairs is prayer. Now the problem is that when you say that to most religious people, they think it means that we should pray for the world. And we should just tell God that he better hurry up and solve all these complex problems that we've created for ourselves. But it isn't this kind of prayer that we're talking about. The kind of prayer that is needed is the prayer that we meet in the teaching of Jesus, where he describes contemplation, going into the inner room, closing the door, praying there in that secret place. The prayer in which we don't use many words. The prayer in which we lay aside our worries, anxieties, and problems. We don't focus on them. The prayer where we pay attention, where we are mindful, single-pointed. Set your mind on God's kingdom, he says, and all the rest will come to you in due course. And the prayer of the present moment. Don't worry about tomorrow, he says. So, very clearly, this is the prayer that Jesus teaches. Contemplative experience, the prayer of the heart or the inner room. This is the prayer that the desert monks understood as pure prayer, oratio pura, simplicity itself. So, it is this experience of prayer that allows us to change the world, beginning with the way we see it, the way we see the world. We will only change the world, just as we will only change our own circumstances personally, if we learn to pay attention to it in a different way. Now, the interesting thing about this is that we normally think of prayer as techniques that we use to, in a left brain kind of way, to manipulate reality, to handle God, to pull God's strings in order to change the world as we think it should be changed. So prayer is my technology of changing external circumstances. Clearly this is not what Jesus does as he goes through his passion. When Pilate says to him, "So you're a king?" He says, "Okay, you can call me a king if you like, if that's the best way you can understand it, but I'm not your kind of king. My kingdom is not of this world." So, prayer is not about manipulating power games, changing external circumstances. Prayer does change the world, and it can save us, but only if we accept that it changes us first. That the first thing to change when we're really praying is the mind and the heart of the person who is praying. We change. And that is, I think, the heart of all spiritual practice, of all contemplation. John Main spoke about prayer, meditation, the prayer of the heart, in this same tradition. He focused upon what I think is the biggest challenge for modern left brain, technologically oriented, sometimes obsessed and distracted people like ourselves. And that is when he speaks about meditation as the way of transcending our self-consciousness. And that, I think, does send a little tremor of fear, and we're talking about fear today, a little tremor of fear through us. And that may well be why some people don't want to come near meditation, or if they do want to come near meditation, they want to come not too close to it. They want to sort of get what they can get out of meditation. So what would normally be seen in the spiritual traditions as the byproducts of prayer become the main goal of prayer. So, but in the wisdom of prayer, and this is something we find at the heart of all the great teachings, there is this idea, or this reality of sacrifice. And we can't make sense of the story of Holy Week without confronting this reality of sacrifice. And we'll come to this maybe tomorrow. We think of sacrifice in a primitive way as something we do externally. We sacrifice something, sometimes someone even, in order to make things better, make ourselves feel better, make God feel better. But the wisdom tradition tells us the sacrifice that we need to practice, and we do need to understand sacrifice, at least experientially, and no one who has loved your children, or loved your friend, or loved your spouse, or no one who has ever loved has failed, could fail, to understand sacrifice. So, what is the sacrifice we are making when we meditate? Remember, in the Christian tradition, contemplation, this experience of contemplation, is the work of love. It takes us into this ocean of love, this fountain of love that is God, that flows in our hearts, God who loves us first, before we love God, God loves us. So, what is it that takes us into this? It is attention. The sacrifice we make is the sacrifice of attention. It's where we place our attention. So letting go of our self-consciousness is in a way sacrificing part of us, but not the whole of us. It's letting go of that part of us which is trained on ourselves, that has limited intelligence, limited awareness, limited depth of perception or feeling. So we take the attention off ourself, off our thoughts, off our self-referring stream of consciousness, and allow this miracle of consciousness to unfold. What seems like a contraction of our attention, where we are focusing on our word, single-pointedness, is actually an expansion. That's the effect that we feel in our lives. That's why people meditate, even though meditation may be difficult from day to day. They still continue to meditate because they feel this expansion taking place throughout their life. So, and that very idea takes us really into the Paschal mystery itself. Our death, which seems like a loss, seems like a contraction, and is in fact to be discovered as expansion, as resurrection, as liberation. So we're learning that in the simplest, most direct, hands-on kind of way as we learn to say the mantra and return to it faithfully as we learn to meditate. The Cloud of Unknowing speaks of this as the naked awareness of ourself. It's simple, just as we are. When we put on clothes, we become a little more complex. We project images, we project style, I don't know. But when we're naked, well, we're who we are. We're simple. And this is a beautiful image, really, of understanding what it is we're doing when we meditate. Remember what the Buddha said, what do you get out of meditation? Nothing. But I lose a lot. You know? So we just approach it this way, we will solve a lot of our resistance to meditation, and we'll give ourselves the chance to experience it and learn from our experience. So when we meditate, we're sort of taking off our clothes. We're laying aside our thoughts, the thoughts that clothe us continually. So we're laying that aside, letting go, and that is the very way into the fullness of life. So let's turn towards our meditation now.